and continuing smoothly. Indication now using the workaround.
Retro, FIDO, guidance, control, telemute, GNC, ECOM, surgeon, procedures, ENCO, FAO, network.
Release at the T-minus 17 seconds.
Okay, Robert, we're ready and we're going for
Final guidance release. 10, 9, 8, 7, ignition sequence.
In December of 1972, I was a bright-eyed 10-year-old living in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. One night my mom got me out into the street with all our neighbors and we watched the launch of Apollo 17. Nearly 50 years later, I remember holding out a quarter at arm's length and noticing that the flame from that Saturn V was longer than the quarter, despite the fact that we were more than 150 miles from Cape Kennedy. Apollo 17 was the last of the moon missions, starting with the tragic fire that took the lives of astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. The Apollo program saw us leave low Earth orbit and circumnavigate the moon. There were 6 lunar landings and 1 emergency in space with Apollo 13. Ronald Evans was the command module pilot and circled the moon while Harrison Schmitt guided the lunar module to the surface. He was also the first geologist on the moon. Eugene Cernan was the commander of the Apollo 17 mission. He's in the red stripes. Apollo 17 spent more time on the moon and in lunar orbit than any of the other Apollo missions. In addition to placing numerous scientific experiments, some of which are still in use today, they collected over 200 pounds of moon rocks and soil samples in the lunar highlands, the most of any lunar mission. Although the Apollo program had been the result of a decade worth of concentrated national effort to put a man on the moon, once we did put that man on the moon, apathy began to set in. Budgetary constraints caused the cancellation of the remaining Apollo landings. Taken on the way to the moon by the crew of Apollo 17, the famous blue marble photograph of the Earth represents the last time man has ventured beyond low Earth orbit. But this series is not about the triumph of the Apollo program. That has been well documented. It isn't about Project Mercury, America's first steps in the manned space program. The goal of Project Mercury was just to find out if people could actually go to space and survive the return. These were the pioneers of the American space program, and simply making the trip was good enough. But the next step in our journey to the moon was learning how to live in orbit, to maneuver our spacecraft, and to perform all of the skills and techniques we needed to go to the moon. And that's what this series is about. Project Gemini. Project Gemini introduced us to those that would lead Project Apollo years later. Aldrin, Armstrong, Lovell, White, Chaffee, all of them came out of the Gemini program. A primary mission for Project Gemini was extended stay in orbit, up to 8 or more days. The purpose of this was to see whether or not people could live in space long enough to get to the moon and back. In addition to undertaking long-duration missions, the two-man Gemini crews developed and perfected the techniques that would be needed later to go to the moon. Each Gemini mission was a milestone, from the very first flight where they changed their orbit, to the first American spacewalk on the second Gemini mission. Here's the original film from astronaut Ed White's first spacewalk on Gemini 4.
At this time, I knew we had something with the gun because it was actually providing me an opportunity to control myself where I wanted to go out there.
On Gemini 6 and 7, two spacecraft were able to come within 30 centimeters of each other in orbit. This is the first orbital rendezvous in the space program. You can actually see a crew member in the window waving.
Hello, Houston. This is Gemini 8. We're station keeping on the Agena at about 150 feet. Way to go, partner.
You done it, boy. You done a good job.
Do the thing.
Boy, look at that sucker.
That's beautiful. See the dipole?
Do I ever? I see everything on that fella.
That was Neil Armstrong and David Scott in Gemini 8. They're performing the first orbital rendezvous and docking with an Agena's target vehicle in 1966. They were able to successfully dock with this vehicle, however they had a short in one of their thrusters and the mission needed to be aborted shortly thereafter. Here's a high contrast photo of that target vehicle. The docking port is right underneath that antenna-like structure on the right. The first class of astronauts was the Mercury 7. 3 of these men, Gordon Cooper, Gus Grissom, and Wally Schirra, went on to lead the Gemini program as senior pilots. The second group of astronauts included Armstrong, White, and Lovell. They commanded the later Gemini and many of the Apollo missions. A third group of astronauts, including Buzz Aldrin and Roger Chaffee, they were active mostly in the Apollo program and in the Space Shuttle program. It was Buzz Aldrin that early in his tenure at NASA suggested astronauts train for weightlessness in pools rather than on a cumbersome bungee system. Early spacewalks were exhausting and awkward. This pool training turned out to be the breakthrough they needed. Well, when we think of the American space program, we tend to think of Apollo. None of that would have been possible without the Gemini program. In this series, we're going to go over each of the missions, the astronauts. In the words of one writer, the purpose of Gemini was to learn how to do all the routine tasks so that the Apollo crews could concentrate on their primary mission of getting to the moon. The Gemini program did this in spades. Well, thank you for stopping by. I hope you enjoy this series as much as I enjoyed making it. This is Bob the Science Guy signing out from Northern Michigan. See you soon.
Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Bolts and liftoff.
That's your clock has started. There's the roll program.
Roger, roll.
Plus 10 seconds. Okay, roll is completed.
Roger, roll, please.
There goes the pitch.
Roger, pitch. You're on your way, Molly Brown.